Hierbij open ik deze academische zitting waarin Andra Waagmeester het academisch proefschrift getiteld Biological Pathway Abstractions from Two-Dimensional Drawings to Multidimensional Linked Data in het openbaar zal verdedigen. Mag ik u verzoeken een samenvatting te geven van uw proefschrift?
Geachte prorector, geachte promotiecommissie, geachte supervisoren, geachte familie, geachte vrienden en aanwezigen, honorary people online, welcome to this session. I will continue with a short summary of my work in Dutch, but the defense will be in English. En ik wil graag in de komende 10 tot 15 minuten mijn onderzoek, wat ten grondslag ligt aan dit proefschrift, uitleggen. De titel van dit proefschrift is Biological Pathway Abstractions from Two-Dimensional Drawings to Multidimensional Linked Data. Maar wat bedoel ik nou met de pathways? Heel in het kort laat ik hier een plattegrond zien. Dit is een Michelin-kaart uit 1941. En waar gebruiken wij kaarten voor? Is om de weg te vinden. Als we naar pathways gaan kijken, dan zien we eigenlijk hetzelfde. Alleen kijken we nu niet naar het plattegrond, maar we kijken naar de processen die in de cel plaatsvinden. We zien hier een celmembraan en er allemaal processen die plaatsvinden. Dus de pathways dienen vooral om de weg te vinden tussen de processen die in de cel plaatsvinden. Hier zien we dan aan de linkerkant de legenda. Waar zit een kaart in? Je ziet straten, dorpen, vliegvelden. En aan de andere kant zien we eiwitten, genen, celmembranen, celcomponenten. Maar tegenwoordig gebruiken we eigenlijk plattegronden niet meer. Tegenwoordig gebruiken we vooral zo'n stelling waarbij mensen in een auto rijden. En in het middelste zien wij een plattegrond, zien we een GPS-unit. En met een GPS proberen we hetzelfde te doen als wat we met kaarten doen. Maar we gebruiken veel meer. We gebruiken Waze, we gebruiken Facebook, we gebruiken chat. Maar we hebben ook gouvernementele instellingen of satellieten die informatie naar onze auto toesturen om de weg te vinden. Dat is eigenlijk in pathways niet anders. Dus we gebruiken nog altijd de plattegronden zoals die hier aan de muur staan, maar we gebruiken ook heel veel informatie uit de literatuur, uit biologische databases en noem het maar op. Vandaar ook de titel van mijn proefschrift van tweedimensionale representaties, namelijk gewoon de plattegrond, naar multidimensionale pathways waar alles met elkaar verbonden is via het internet. En hier zou ik eigenlijk mijn samenvatting kunnen stoppen, want daar gaat het proefschrift over. Maar ik ga er toch wat in detail over, want het hoofdstuk bestaat uit een aantal hoofdstukken. Er zijn waarvan 3 core hoofdstukken. In het eerste hoofdstuk ga ik op zoek naar manieren om de literatuur te structureren, om betere pathways te genereren. We gaan ook op zoek naar databases en we gaan ook op zoek naar manieren. Ik zei in de auto net over de auto dat we Facebook gebruiken, maar hoe kunnen we nou de omgeving gebruiken om die data ook in het pathway te krijgen? En misschien even van waarom willen we dat? Hier heb ik een gezellige tafel waar mensen lekker eten. Waarom is het lekker? Het is ook gezond. Ik wil vooral even aandacht treffen op fruit, op de groenten die we daar zien. Maar we zien ook garnalen en zalm en we zien ook flamingo's. Wat is de overeenkomst? Dat is namelijk de organische kleuren die we in deze elementen vinden. En die zijn eigenlijk, in de biologie worden dat carotenoïden genoemd. En die carotenoïden die hebben een functie in het lichaam. En biologen willen graag weten, is het eten gezond? Maar ook, zijn die flamingo's en de zalm, waarom zijn die rood? Hoe komt dat? Nou, daar gebruiken wij pathways voor. En nu ga ik naar het eerste hoofdstuk. We willen graag uit de literatuur weten wat gebeurt er in het carotenoïde pathway. Dus in dit eerste core hoofdstuk, dus wel hoofdstuk 3, de vorige 2 waren de introductiehoofdstukken, ben ik op zoek gegaan naar een manier om de hele berg aan informatie te doorspitten. Om dit pathway. Het ziet er indrukwekkend uit en ik snap dat niemand het kan lezen, maar je moet vooral kijken naar de complexiteit van het proces. Wat we hiermee kunnen doen als je het vergroot, is we kijken eigenlijk nu naar de cel. En dit zijn de stappen die genomen worden om, op het moment dat een carotenoïde in het lichaam komt. En wat ik in dit hoofdstuk heel specifiek gedaan heb, ik ben vertrokken vanuit van een collectie artikelen die heel specifiek waren over carotenoïden. En vervolgens ben ik op zoek gegaan naar een hele grote hoop literatuur. En ik wilde uit die hele grote hoop literatuur de kennis relevant voor de literatuur, voor het carotenoïdeproces halen. Dat heb ik als volgt gedaan. Aan de linkerkant van het diagram zien we een tabel. Dat is een staafdiagram waarin woorden geteld zijn. Dus elke staaf komt overeen met een woord die in alle documenten voorkomen over het carotenoïde pathway. En aan de rechterkant zien we individuele frequenties van die woorden. En als je dan ziet, dan zie je dat de eerste en de vierde documenten ongeveer overeenkomen met het linker document. En de stelling is dan ook, die twee documenten zijn relevant voor het carotenoïde metabolisme. En op die manier was ik in staat om meerdere nieuwe elementen toe te voegen aan het reeds bestaande carotenoïde pathway. Het volgende hoofdstuk gaat over het ontcijferen van de biologische data. En dat kan je misschien het best omschrijven met zo'n klube. Biologen die met de data overheen moeten gaan, moeten door een hele hoop data heen gaan. In het volgende hoofdstuk probeer ik dan door die database heen te gaan. Maar data wat ook onduidelijk kan zijn, omdat we in taalgebruik verschillende problemen hebben. Zo zien we hier water. Water kan geschreven worden als H2O en water. En we willen eigenlijk die informatie combineren. Maar als je niet weet dat H2O en water hetzelfde is, dan ga je die informatie niet kunnen combineren. Hetzelfde zien we met die andere elementen daarin. We zien daarin, bijvoorbeeld in de bovenste tabel, zien we carotenoïden, wat eigenlijk een verzamelnaam is voor alle andere. Maar we willen graag die twee termen ook aan elkaar kunnen. Dus dit is heel in het kort een probleem waar biologen mee te maken krijgen op het moment dat ze termen met elkaar moeten combineren. Dat heb ik in dit hoofdstuk opgelost in pathways, door pathways op te schrijven in wat ik noem triples. En een triples is eigenlijk een stelling, maar dan in de vorm van een database. En dat heel dichtbij in de buurt komt van hoe wij het Engels spreken. Hier zien we dan de carrot contains beta-carotene. En als we dat nou heel snel gaan samenvoegen, kunnen we eigenlijk data opschrijven, niet in een verzameling van tabellen, maar kunnen we data gaan opschrijven in een aantal stellingen. Dan heb ik het probleem van de onduidelijkheid in de woorden nog niet opgelost. Dat los ik wel op door vervolgens niet het woord wortel of carrot te gebruiken, maar gebruik te maken van webadressen. Hier zien we de twee Wikipedia-artikelen over carrot en vitamine E, provitamine E, wat een ander woord is voor B-carotene en alpha-carotene. En door gebruik te maken van die webadressen heb ik en de data samengevoegd en de ambivalentie van de woorden heb ik op kunnen lossen. En wat we dan doen is, dan kunnen we al die data op één grote hoop gooien en is alles met elkaar verbonden. Want elk puntje daar is een database, maar in dat puntje is elk datapunt ook een webadres. Dus we kunnen heel eenvoudig door de documenten heen bladeren. Het volgende hoofdstuk maken we gebruik van Wikidata. Wikidata is gekoppeld aan Wikipedia. Waarom willen we dat? Er is niet voor alle concepten die we hebben, is er een Wikipedia-artikel. In het vorige hoofdstuk hebben we onze eigen webadressen gedefinieerd. Maar we willen eigenlijk ook zorgen dat we andere mensen hun webadressen kunnen gebruiken. Wikidata laat dat toe. Dus in dat hoofdstuk hebben we verschillende biologische databases geprobeerd te koppelen aan Wikipedia, door expliciet de Wikipedia-artikelen te koppelen met die externe databases. En hoe werkt dat? Hier zien we een Wikipedia-pagina. Op elke Wikipedia-pagina waar je naartoe gaat, zie je bij de rode pijl een link dat wat verwijst naar Wikidata. Dat is een database van Wikipedia. Hier zien we zo'n ding. En het is nogal klein, dat is een beetje spijtig. Maar als we kijken naar de bovenste term hier, dan zien we eigenlijk wat ik net liet zien. De zinsconstructie van het onderwerp, het werkwoord, dat is hier, en het leidend voorwerp. Dus al de data hier past opnieuw op de grote klube. Dit is dan de representatie van de data die we toegevoegd hebben aan Wikidata en daarmee aan de grote klube die jullie net gezien hebben. En tenslotte is er, nadat we alles in simpele zinnetjes hebben opgeschreven, wil je toch nog weten hoe volgen de zinnen elkaar op. Nou, in het laatste hoofdstuk maak ik gebruik van een taal, dat heet shape expressions. En daarmee beschrijven we formeel hoe die zinnen elkaar opvolgen. Dan zie je hier in dit plaatje 2 biologen. Aan de ene kant een data-owner, aan de andere kant iemand met een biologisch probleem. En wat ze doen is een contract schrijven aan de ene kant. Dit verwacht ik van jouw data. En aan de andere kant is er de data-owner die zegt dit genereert mijn data. Nou, heel actueel was dat. Je ziet 19 maart 2020, we werden allemaal geconfronteerd met COVID. En de eerwaarde co-supervisor vroeg mij toen op Twitter, kunnen wij heel snel achterhalen waar COVID nou mee te maken heeft. Wij hebben toen online, inderdaad alles geprobeerd te formaliseren in ADF. Maar we hebben ook zo'n schema proberen te maken. En wat je hier ziet is zo'n representatie van die kennis. En nu zijn we dus in staat om heel snel data toe te voegen, maar ook weer te verbinden met andere databases. Dus om af te sluiten, de biologische pathways zijn instrumenteel in biologen de weg te wijzen in de kennis die we hebben over processen in de cel. Er bestaan computertechnologie om door de hele grote hoop informatie te spitten. Het semantic web, wat dus een extensie is van het World Wide Web, namelijk het gebruik van webadressen, laat toe dat we snel data kunnen integreren van verschillende databronnen. Wikidata als portal van Wikipedia helpt in het stroomlijnen en vinden van die webadressen. En de shape expressions geven ons het formaat om ook te kunnen documenteren hoe we de verschillende dataprocessen kunnen samenvoegen. En hiermee wil ik graag mijn lekenpraatje eindigen. And I would like to give the word back to the prorector. Dank u voor uw aandacht. Thank you for your attention for those who are online.
Dank u wel voor uw presentatie. Yes, we now switch to English for the opposition. And the opposition will be opened by Professor Dumoutier, who was also the chair of the assessment committee of your thesis. He's professor of data science at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Madam Prorector. Dear candidate, I want to first congratulate you on the quality of your written thesis. It was very well written, and also provided a delightful combination of an interdisciplinary thesis, one containing elements of computer science and, of course, one of biology, to address the problem of pathway representation and curation. I would like to focus my discussion with you on ontology. And immediately, one of your propositions caught my attention, and I would like to ask a paranym to recite proposition number 5 to kick off our discussion.
The lack of fine-grained ontologies and controlled vocabularies hinders the adoption of the RDF.
Thank you. Dear candidate, let us explore this in the context of your work that you have done, and also in terms of federated query answering, which are part of your thesis. In chapter 4, you proposed a simple wiki pathway ontology derived from this GPML. I would like you to explain to me, what are the challenges in developing an ontology in the first place?
Highly esteemed opponent, dear Michelle, thank you very much for this question. And maybe to answer this question, I have to go back when we started this. So when I started with the work in putting the content of wiki pathways to the semantic web, I looked at a lot of existing ontologies. And I would say the design pattern in our work is that we don't invent our own ontologies. So at the time, we were looking at Bio2RDF, which I understand, I think you were part of it. We looked at BioPax, which is a high quality representation of ontologies. And I tried to map the data in wiki pathways into that, to reuse existing ontologies. And I have had many discussions with people in the field saying if I would have done the work again, I would have done it differently. Only to be confronted only recently with the exact same situation, which is also stemming why I'm making the ontology, why I made that ontology. So there are a lot of ontologies out there. We have OBO, we have SCIO, we have bioschemas, we have schema.org, we have Wikidata. And every time when you try to map that to RDF, you lack the nuance. And the design pattern there is, if you lack the nuance, you go to the community and you try to embed that nuanced view into that ontology. And in my experience, it turned out to be very hard. And it's the same thing that happened in the Wiki Pathways RDF. So it was at the time when we decided to go from biopacks away to the RDF representation of the GPM ontology, was basically that if you look at the biopacks ontology, you cannot model spatial orientation in the pathways, which in the Wiki Pathways case is very important.
So why not extend biopacks instead of designing something new?
That's a very good question, and well, that should be the default answer, but it requires engaging into the community. So it's, I would say my answer still, and then I have to attack my own work, is please engage with the community. Go to OBO, go to SCIO, go to schema.org, and try to engage into the community. But the big problem with those communities, it takes a lot of time. And at the time when I was working the Wiki Pathways RDF, my plan was actually that this would have been a throwaway ontology, and we would align with the biopacks, and that didn't happen. I blame myself for this at the time, but I'm seeing this occurring over and over again.
I think your idea of the throwaway ontology is not uncommon. It is perhaps the reason why there are thousands of ontologies and vocabularies. Everybody thinks, I just need something now, but something that lasts to the future is a little bit harder. But, so thank you for this answer. But if I look at, for instance, in chapter 5, there is some work there to involve the community to curate and to extend the Wikidata ontology with subclass relationships and new disease terms. So there you are embedded in a community, or as you cited, community of communities for Wikidata. How did this go? Is there a different outcome to the engagement in the community, or what is the reflection there?
No, I actually think that is it's a logical follow-up of the previous chapter with Wiki Pathways RDF. You want to engage with the community. I don't see Wikidata as an ontology. To me, it's a proxy to those ontologies. You cannot make your own ontology in Wikidata. You have to reflect on existing ontologies, which in this work we did with disease ontology and other ontologies. And then what Wikidata presents is actually that bridge to the other ontologies. So for example, I actually should check if we did that. In an ideal world, we would have mapped biopacks with GPML, and then you would be able to use Wikidata to navigate between those views.
Yeah, that may be the case, but recently, there was only 3 weeks ago, Peter Patel-Snyder invited the community to review and revise the Wikidata ontology. What is he talking about?
Can I say good question?
Okay.
No, I think, so, how do I start here? That's going to be a long answer. No, I think there is some sense of ontologies in there, but ontologies, and I must say, in my work, I conflate between ontologies and controlled vocabularies. I'm aware that this will offend a lot of ontologists, because an ontologies is not only a controlled vocabulary, but it's also a lot of axioms and rules that apply. Those don't exist in, they somehow exist in Wikidata. So you can actually, it's the same applies to provenance and references in Wikidata. The moment you will start using Wikidata in anger, you will run into a lot of blind walls. And I think the role of Wikidata is not there. The role of Wikidata is to find the ontologies and then engage in the ontologies with the actual ontological work.
That's an interesting idea, but of course the Wikipedia and Wikidata are really community-curated resources. They're centralized, whereas there are hundreds of ontology projects, especially in biology, with different practices, different infrastructure. It's chaotic. What is preferable? A central place where everybody works together to build an ontology for the domain, or 1,000, different initiatives that haphazardly overlap and are incomplete with any kind of fine-grained ontology required for a project?
I would actually like to say the latter. We want more. And maybe we should align it with the scientific literature. There is not one journal. There are many overlapping journals. Why Wikidata is really, really interesting is because you can also model conflicting examples. If you dive really deep into Wikidata, the Earth is flat. Mm-hmm. And the importance in that is you can ignore certain provenance patterns. So you really dive into a complex maze of issues when you really start Wikidata as an ontology. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm saying, like, we really need to use it as maybe the F in FAIR. We find the ontologies that we use to navigate further into ontological space. But this is a really interesting question, and I would really like to work forward on this, but because I'm saying Wikidata is not an ontology, but this is an impression on experiences, but not in a structure. I haven't looked at it in a structural manner.
Yes, thank you. Madame Prorector, is there time for yet another question?
If it is a very short question.
Well, very well.
And a short answer.
Dear candidate, my last question is a bit about if there is this proliferation of ontologies, does that not pose a challenge with composing federated queries?
Yes.
How do we reconcile this let 1,000 flowers bloom, and yet users of these are stymied from the plethora of options and the complexity of their representation?
So I recently went to a conference, and there I was introduced to I know it's SSOM, Sesame, where you map ontologies. And I ended up comparing that with political parties. So an ontology is a political party, and the mapping files is a coalition accord when we start using the ontologies. I would like to use that as an answer to this query. We want a lot of opinions, a lot of views, but it's in the mapping and that we should focus, the mapping between the ontologies where everybody identifies the ontologies where they're comfortable with. And it's a short answer. We should continue over
Thank you. I turn it back to Madame Prorector.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Professor Wenzel, Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Data Science at Wageningen University.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, congratulations also from my side for delivering this work, combining global practices like World Wide Web, semantic technologies with bioinformatics. Was a very interesting read. And two questions, well, starting from computer science perspective and looking at the main topic of the work, it has to deal with processes and step-by-step procedures. What is your take on, and also in semantic web community, there have been work done in relation to, well, semantic process modeling, semantic services, semantic workflows, and this kind of technologies, so going beyond data. So what do you think? Is it something also what is integratable, or is it too complex, or what's your opinion on this?
Highly esteemed opponent. So my answer always is yes, because the semantic web is simple, but it is not. So we're talking about the processes, about the social processes. We're talking about a lot of things that we typically not look at in bioinformatics or in biology. We talk about genes, we talk about proteins, and we look at the face value. But when you talk about semantic processing, I'm thinking you're talking about also semantically describing the processes we are dealing when we analyze the data. Yeah. So I would say yes, it is possible, but every semantic process, so adding a semantic layer to your data, takes time. It takes a lot of time. So the question is always, yes, in an ideal world, we should be able to do everything in this semantic layer. But the question becomes, when do we want to do this? And in my opinion, we want to do this when the question requires integration. So will the effort be? We have to step back. We have to look at the processes. We have to look at the applications we use. And if we want to integrate, we will need to model the metadata. We need to model the processes, and every single step there will take time, which means aligning with the ontologies, which points a bit back to the previous question. Is the ontological space mature enough to cover those things? So I think the short answer might be yes, it's possible, if. And that is really the important question. I'm going to point it back to you. I hope I have answered your question or did I misunderstand your question?
Yeah, no, I think, what do you think, follow up maybe from there, do you think the major complexity would come? Yes, of course, I agree with you cannot do, semantify everything because we would have too much work to do, so we should stop somewhere. But do you think the main challenge with this is more like lack, for example, of developer skills, or lack of user willingness to engage with some systems, or something else?
No, to be honest, I think it's basically a lack of, that's a harsh what I'm saying, because it is about transparency. It is because what we're tipping, and that's what I point back to when I said in bioinformatics we look at formats. And in a lot of the semantic web work, that is also what we do. We compare JSON-LD with CSV, with GraphQL, with you name it. And what I would really like to do is we should focus on the semantics. I'm currently in my 6th chapter, I'm talking about shape expressions, which is a community I joined in 2016. And there is a competing standard quote that's called Shackle. And whenever I'm in a conference where people, when I'm talking about shapes, which is basically if I wanted to model disease, gene-disease association, and I explain we can model it by going from the gene directly to the disease, or maybe we go from the gene to the protein to the disease, and we actually want to describe all that. There is always this typical question, because I'm using Shackle, why didn't you use Shackle? And that really infuriates me all the time, because I don't want to have that discussion. I really want to have the discussion about what are the patterns that we, so I think what we really need to do is engage with the shapes, thinking in knowledge graphs, thinking in the constructs that we have with the semantic web, and maybe deviate a bit away from discussions about RDF, Sparkle, GraphQL, which is sometimes the tone that our people are having in a discussion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Well, next question. Well, you've designed some prototypes, and you also tested it. And with which communities? Now, I mean, on the domain side, for example, nutritionist or specific type of biology, was you think is most the suggested solutions were most successful, and also why?
Oh, I wouldn't pinpoint to any domain specific, but I have seen in the times when I apply when I'm working with RDF, the most successful project is really when we identify a proper question. So usually you go into we make up a hello world example, and we model it around the hello world. The moment we have a real question where people are really struggling to identify the data or to integrate the data, then people will actually spend some time to go to the steep learning curve that comes with linked data. So I think the biggest challenge in the adoption is also, next to the fine-grained ontologies I mentioned, is also to really identify the use cases. And I see this a lot in my work, especially I'm now doing work in cultural heritage, agriculture, and in molecular biology. I don't know anything about cultural heritage. And so I will make up some examples, and the domain experts will look at me and they're like, what are you talking about? So the question really is to identify a community where you can actually easily bridge between computer science and the domain experts, and you start developing your own vocabularies and own patterns to discuss, and then I'm convinced that's the road to success.
Mm-hmm. So does it mean that you measure engagement of people with, for example, a system where everything is linked to Wikidata by how people try to find, for example, new data sets which they didn't know before, or new concepts to work with, or new data, and this is the main use case then?
So if we specifically focus on Wikidata, I would consider success a metric where people start indeed thinking in linked terms and not in combining a collection of Excel sheets. And whether that goes with Wikidata or any other linked data, that's in my opinion less relevant. But at the moment we start really thinking in, so you have the formats, but you also have the community standards. And so the moment we start thinking in community standards, I think we're on a path for success.
Mm-hmm. Did you see any specific community which really was more successful with this thinking, transition to the thinking?
Yes, in Wikidata specifically, there are many examples. There is the Wiki project Biodiversity. There is the Gene Wiki project. There are multiple projects, but those are sub-communities. There is the music history community in there, and then it's not so much the success of the. My favorite example is actually the public transport. So, like 7 years ago, if you would go to Wikidata and you compared public transport in San Francisco and Paris, you would have completely different shapes that are being used. Now you can query on Wikidata, and you use a query from Paris in San Francisco, and you will get the same answer. So you'll see that both the schemas on one side and data on the other side are moving towards each other, and then suddenly you can use one query from one domain to the other.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, also in the recent year there has been new technology appear in what we call large language models, and you were also talking about retrieving information from, well, scientific literature in particular. Do you think or if you would do this direction now, how would you approach it?
Well, this is quite interesting. And
changes.
This is quite interesting because in the chapter where we talked about text mining, at a time we actually started with two approaches. And the initial approach was one where we would actually look at the grammatical structure of papers. So we would say what is like we all do in school. We learn how to decompose the sentences and try to get the information following the grammars that are intrinsic to the languages. And the results there were really, really not good, to the extent that they didn't get up into the paper. And then we applied the approach that is in this paper. At the beginning, I was stupefied because it's called a bag of words. And what we simply do is basically you take all the documents, you shake it good, so that all the relationships, anything that is being described in the paper is lost, and you start counting words. That's all you do. And then you like I showed in my slide, you create a histogram of the word, and you compare that with individual documents. And in the beginning, I was stupefied that had better success than when we did a proper grammatical analysis. So with that in mind, I discarded the idea of following the grammatical structures. But now with the renewed attention to large language models, specifically on ChatGPT, you suddenly see that patterns that I was working with in the beginning at that work suddenly are working. So I think, but here I'm going on a slippery slope. I think that what at the time we were lacking was sufficient data and sufficient computer power. And the fact that we have now better models, maybe, I'm not the expert here, we have better computer power, but we also have better text that are structured. We are maybe revisiting that distinction between, on the one side, simply counting words, and on the other side, considering the structure and complexity that we have in large language models. But here I'm really speculating. This is just by playing and using those large language models in the field. So I think that is a really interesting direction for research now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Yeah, your time is up. I'm sorry. Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Dekker, Professor of Clinical Data Sciences at Maastricht University.
Dear candidate, also on behalf of me, congratulations on your thesis and also the promotion committee. Also congratulations on a great candidate and mentoring him. I would like to continue on the previous discussion about AI, and I would like to ask one of your paranymphs to read out proposition number 11.
In a time when AI skyrockets, it is good to remember that when creation is a fully automated process, it becomes a contradiction in terms.
So, with your thesis spanning about 15 years, right, in terms of publication, I'm sure research even longer, in informatics, a lot has changed in that time. And I would posit to you that rather than being a better text miner, foundation models are slightly different in the way they are learned and in the way they are applied. What's different about them is that they're self-supervised, meaning you don't have to give them the answer.
Sorry, you don't have
They're
to?
you don't have to give them the answer, like, you know, there's a gene in this text or something. The second thing is they're multidimensional. They learn on many different data, including text, but also images and other things nowadays. And the third is that they have multiple uses. So my bet is that GPT-4 you can ask, write me a biological pathway in a graph of whatever, right, of your thesis. So my question to you is, what's the future of this manual curation of FAIR, of linked data, if what foundation models do is produce linked data for us, which we don't have to sparkle, we can just ask natural language questions and get our answers. Should we still do this type of work?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for this thought-provoking question, which I induced by making that proposition in my thesis. And yes, we should still do that, which is also the basis of this thesis, because indeed those models, they are in self-induced, but they are based on models that are originally stemming from our work. Is it being modeled? Are they being correctly modeled as FAIR models? There are assumptions that might not be explicitly captured in those models.
But what would you care if they give the right answer?
That's a good question. No. I don't care if it gives the wrong answer, but I do care if we just don't supervise that.
Why?
Because, why? Yes, because I don't believe we're there yet. I must be. Indeed, I haven't done any structural research on that, but looking at, and this is just my personal experience, which ChatGPT is basically 1 year old. It's quite interesting to see what I think the terms now use hallucinations.
Right.
That hallucinations that come out, and it's quite interesting. You might have seen my slides. I used my slides. I used ChatGPT to generate those pages,
right.
And it was a really fun exercise, because when you try to write down what you want, then
so you're saying it's a matter of quality at the moment.
Yes.
Right. But you can estimate with the advances that GPT has made in text only, right? Or GPT-4 is actually more than text. You can just see the trajectory where AI is going, that with more, because it has never seen medical data, it has never seen your lab's data. It has to learn from the internet, basically, perhaps Wikipedia data for somehow. But you can estimate if we give it higher quality data, it will give us higher quality answers and be able to create the linked data graph and the knowledge graph and the knowledge or the ontology for us. So do you think is that a good thing for humanity or a bad thing?
I think we're now drifting into the realm of philosophy, because what it also assumes, so if we put the humans out of the equation, that we are just mere language models ourselves. So we're using the technology to our benefit. I mean, it's not that we're using because it's a painting or it's beautiful, but there is a problem that we have. So if we argue that we as a person are actually large language model, it's just fine-tuning the models, putting more data in, making sure that it is, learn it better like we do in research, basically replicating our conducts in science into those models, assuming, and that's why I'm saying we're going into the realm of philosophy, that we are all here just individual learning large language models.
Well, but some tasks could be, right? This manual curation and finding contradictions and adding triples to Wikidata, you can imagine that it's very trivial for a computer to do that, right? So which part of your thesis you think is still left for us humans to do?
Oh, a lot. So if I point back to the Wiki Pathways RDF, and when I talked to Michel, so initially when we did that work, I tried to work with Wikipedia with Bio2RDF. Bio2RDF did that. And at some point we run into issues. And the issues was basically difference in version control. Because at the time in Bio2RDF, they embedded a lot of the data sources that were in different data. So Bio2RDF is a knowledge representation at the time of existing ontologies that are existing biological databases that were not present on the semantic web. So what Bio2RDF did is they tried to have a semantic web representation of the data. And then at the time when you tried to, this was in the project in Wikipathways RDF was done in the context of open facts. And we ran into many issues where we tried to have the drug bank representation the drug bank representation that is existed in Bio2RDF. And there was another, and I forgot the name, there was another representation of drug bank that was 5 or 6 versions behind or in front of that was into Bio2RDF. And that ran into very, very complex questions. So because what happens between those versions is that in the initial versions, and we saw the same thing when we looked at, for example, the disease ontology, you put it onto Wikidata, then it starts to have a life on its own. Someone comes in and says, this is actually an incorrect representation of the data. That is then sent back to the ontologist curators, and they reflect and they corrected the data. But at the time, the versioning was not modeled into the RDF. So that is one problem.
Right. So it's if you, and I have to cut you short because I have to give the word back to the prorector. So it's perhaps a dynamic nature of knowledge, and that we still need humans for and to curate that dynamic.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Roos, Associate Professor at Leiden University.
Thank you, Madam Pro-Rector and dear candidate. It's a pleasure to be here, and it was also a pleasure to read your thesis. I second the positive comments about that. I have it's really amazing the committee, the fair expertise that is around the table. But I got to ask the question: how fair is your own thesis? How fair are the results of your own thesis?
Esteemed opponent, how fair is my... Thank you for this question. Okay, I need to think a bit about this. I should have known this question would come from you. So, how fair is my thesis? Okay, let me show you. I would say it also depends who is in the room. I mean, if Mark Wilkinson would be in the room, I would say no, it's not fair. But we also disagree on the fact that Wikidata is not fair. I don't think that fair is something that you put a stamp on. So I would say my thesis, is it fair? Sort of. So there is text in the thesis that is not online. Well, the thesis will be online, but the introduction, the discussion, that is not part of. But the other chapters that are there are all openly licensed. I'm thinking if they are in a linked data format, yes, through Scholia and the metadata of the bibliometrics of the papers, they are in there. The data, I would argue as well, because for those of you who are not familiar with FAIR, I assume it's an open-ended question. I shouldn't say, but I'm thinking we're talking about findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Is it findable? Yes. I just checked this morning. I will type a term in Google and it finds up actually. Is it accessible? Yes. Well, it should be. I haven't checked that.
For machines, I would like to know it for machines.
No. Well, depends on what you want to hear. Yes, the individual papers in there with all the keywords and the metadata on those papers, yes, they are there. So there I would say it's accessible. The individual chapters, not a thesis of its own.
And if we take it one step further, so if you would like to make it fairer than it is now, or some of the results in it, what tools would you use?
That's a good question. How we want to make it fairer?
And maybe some of your own tools that you describe in the thesis?
No, I don't think the text mining approach that I proposed in the text mining chapter would make it more fairer. But the question is, do we really want this thesis to be fair? So I would argue not.
But that's a very good question to ask. It's the first question in our verification pipeline. What's the objective?
Yeah, but then I guess you might disagree, but yeah, maybe we should discuss that then over. I would say it's fair enough.
Some statements maybe, and maybe your propositions as nano publications, these can happen, right? What I also wanted to ask you, and that relates to your impact chapter. My feeling was that you do not emphasize the combination of techniques, your own combination of techniques that you describe in the thesis. So what would you say about what's the impact of the combination of the techniques, and maybe in the context of curation, what it is now, what it should be in the future? Will some components become obsolete? Will there be new components in future curation? Will curation disappear altogether? But especially the combination of techniques.
So from a computer science perspective, this thesis probably is boring. And especially in the time when I was working, it was actually at the time also frustrating. Because if you do text mining, and I think that was novel at the time for when I did that work, text mining was typically done by benchmarks. So people were not interested in finding new concepts. It was about we have this core text mining approach, these are the results, and this is a text mining approach that we do better. And they have these nice numbers to compare with those benchmarks. And that's basically, and I think that is still the case. So when you're coming from computer science, what you do is you align your method with the method, and data is less relevant. You basically work with test data sets. And I think what is new here is that and that was quite difficult to get your text mining paper published at the time, because they just want, the journals want F numbers. They want to say, okay, but what new is that we really applied it on the biology. And the same applies to the Wiki Pathways RDF, to those at the time already who were working. I mean, 10 years before me, you had the link TCGA. People were doing link data already there. So it was already old school in there. But I think what in this thesis is that the application of the technology. So we went from basically maybe you could call it is an opportunistic thesis, because I went in with text mining. I ran into an issue to represent the terms that came out of the text mining pipeline. So I stumbled upon the semantic web.
Would you think, and then I think I need to give the floor back, would you think that the curator of the now and of the future will be using text mining, Wikidata, the RDFization, this combination of techniques?
Yes. Yes.
So with that, I give the floor back. Thank you.
Thank you for the short answer. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Kevel, Assistant Professor at Maastricht University.
Dear candidate, I echo the congratulations that we've heard from around the table. And one of the key themes that came back again and again, and we've also heard a bit already about, is the amount of work that it takes to make our data interoperable. And I was wondering, is this inevitable? We've heard about what would you do again if you started your thesis or you started this chapter again, but if we sort of turned back the time and we turned back the clock and we could just start again and we knew what data we'd end up with in 20, 30 years' time, should we have designed things differently? Should we have been smarter, more organized at the very start? Could we have avoided the necessity of all of this work, all of this manual labor that people are now doing, and maybe in the future will be done by ChatGPT or GPT-4, to actually make all of this stuff work and to find out these new answer the biological questions we have?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for this question. And I had a lot of discussion with my co-supervisor Egon Willekhagen on this matter, and I have been saying up until maybe even 6 months ago, I wish I could do it over again, because I would have done it differently. The Wiki Pathways RDF. Pointing back to that, I would actually really try to engage more with the BioPlex community, try to engage with the Bio2RDF community, because I thought it was basically a matter of being social with those communities. Only to be confronted and calling myself an hypocrite. I'm currently doing a project where I came in with this notion we should not invent our own ontology, and I'm doing exactly this at exactly the same time. And the reason is which is also the basis for one of the propositions in my thesis, is we don't have sufficient yes, we have a lot of ontologies, but for example, if you're dealing, and one of the questions was in the symposium this morning, I think I asked it, so if you're dealing with cancer data, what do you use? SNOMED, or SNOMED with combination with LOINC, or do we use NCIT? And this is still to this day the discussion that I'm having, and then we're not having arguments about, well, this nuance in SNOMED is better than this one in NCIT. The argument is, well, we don't want to use SNOMED because SNOMED doesn't have an open model, so it doesn't apply in other countries. So, well, NCIT is aligned with OBO, and we have to use the founding ontologies that underneath. These are all arguments. So, and you have a lot of social engagements, a lot of discussions with, and not sometimes even political, in the sense when we are doing a research project and we have selected this ontology. So, and then you run into design problems, and then it is really difficult to say, let's reuse it. And then the easy way out is exactly what I did in this chapter, is try to make just make a new ontology, again with the assumption it's a throwaway ontology. I will use the time. So we have a working model. I've done a work with the group of Marco in there where we specifically use Wikidata for that, what we call opportunistic modeling, with the argument that we use Wikidata items because in Wikidata it is easier to mint URIs. And then once we have this term in any of the ontologies, we can replace the Wikidata term with that ontology. And I think it is still as hard as it was when the first paper came in, because what it does, but I can talk about this for hours, but the point I wanted to make is what is interesting is what you see is that no, we will never solve these discussions. It's an ever ongoing question, but what is changing is that people are thinking in web addresses. People are thinking in community standards. We're deviating away from talking about formats. We're talking now about community standards. So yes, maybe works like Wikipathways RDF, what we have, but also the other examples that I give, are throwaway data, but it kind of massages the way forward. Maybe we should just throw it away as something maybe for further research, is that we take maybe a year and we just design something, we throw it away, and we start from scratch, and now we work with reusable ontology. But this is the direction for the future. But to summarize, when I was talking to Egon, I said we should really get rid of those, what were the names again? Identifiers.org URIs that we use in Wikipathways RDF. We should use proper URIs. And now I'm making the same mistake.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Does that answer your question, or did I take it away?
I think we got that. Okay. I'd like to just ask something about chapter 7, the discussion chapter. So in this chapter, you use the example of Gregor Mendel. And you say, well, he published a hypothesis which was ignored and then later rediscovered, and we have Mendelian genetics. But you conclude that being findable isn't enough for findings to be used for progress. Now, my concern here is that not all findable results are true. So I know the example of Consensus Path database. This is a database where they've taken lots of public resources, pathway resources, and they've mapped them all together onto a giant network. And they've got KEGG, they've got Reactome, they've got Wikipathways, a whole host, 20 or 30 databases now. And yet at some point when I talk to the guys there at the Max Planck Institute about adding databases in, they say that at some point their combined database, at least for humans, is so complete now that when they add a new database in, if there's a new link that hasn't been seen before, the chances of that being a real biological link are tiny. The biggest possibility is it's a false positive. It's error in the data. And so do you see that what's the effect? How are we going to guard against false positive results distracting or even perhaps preventing progress in your utopic, interconnected research findings world?
So maybe reflecting a bit, and maybe I've written it poorly, but what I was pointing out with Mendel, I mean, you see a lot of, the example I use about Mendel in that case is that you say, yeah, we need to digitize the data because look, his data is actually, people didn't find it. he wrote it and it was in a drawer. It's an example we use a lot when we talk about verifying the data, is that data end up in USB sticks in drawers. But the paper I think I'm citing in the discussion chapter was an interesting paper that was written 50 or 60 years later. It was in the 50s of the last year, where they argued that's actually not true. Mendel actually did make sure that he sent, I believe it was 125 copies to the top institutes at the time. So basically everybody who was somebody at that time had access to that knowledge, and yet it took 40 or 50 years before that knowledge came into existence. So I would try to put the message in that discussion that it's not only about findability, but it took 40 or 50 years, I don't know the exact times now, before two other researchers had the time to go over it, and actually also the background to understand what he was talking about, to put it into context. And it's only then that he got the recognition, and we currently have Mendelian inheritance. And I think that points down, I think what you just said about false positive, this is a big problem. We ran into it with the text mining as well. When you do the text mining and you choose words, then yeah, a lot of outliers pop up. But we were able to see, and the most famous example is that magnetic resonance impedance is a protein that, because the MRI was one thing, but there were more severe false positives. So what we are doing here is not taking it at face value, but what I try to argue in that chapter is that it's not only findability and accessibility, because that is where Mendel did a great job. If I understand, if I represent that article well, but the interoperability and the reusability, maybe I'm thinking about that, and it was not in place. It took 50 to 60 years to get the I and the R in FAIR on Mendel to be useful to the research community.
Okay. Thank you. I will pass over to Director.
Thank you. Yeah, just some time for the last opponent, Dr. Jenne, Associate Professor at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Madam Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, great to see this finally here on my table, this thesis, so congratulations on that. When Egan asked me to ask questions to you here, I directly said yes. And the content is definitely interesting and highly needed, because I work with a lot of types of data and I want to link them. So the way how you do it and what is needed, that's nicely described. But there are two words, and they are in the title, and that's going from two-dimensional to multidimensional. I think multidimensional. So when I look at all the different types of data on a pathway, and then I can actually look at one of your papers where you were a co-author on the 10 simple rules for creating reusable pathway models, and something else in the title. Rule 8 is talking about visualization. So I can use all these...
I lost you for a second. The rule 8 then?
The rule 8 is about visualization.
Yeah.
So you can add a lot of information on a node, on a pathway, by using different colors, using the border, using the inside. But rule 7 also mentions readability. So if you put a lot of things on there, it's not readable. And when I look at biology, it's much more complex than only one node in a pathway. So it's in multiple dimensions in a different direction as well. So how can we now use all this linked data and create multiple dimension, so not the 2D drawings, even though we have linked data on there, put it in a 3D dimension or even more dimensions? That's my question to you.
Esteemed opponent, thank you for this question. I think we kind of solved that in the Wikipathways RDF, in the sense that what we tried to do there, why did we deviate? So I might disagree with you, or violently agree, it depends on how we want to say it, about that you don't want to put a lot of information. I think the most interesting example is if we look at the Krebs cycle, or the metabolic pathway. There is a circle in there.
Yeah.
If you look at, there's a lot of, and if you have complex, you have very complex citric acid. I think there is even one in my thesis, which is the famous Boehringer map. Well, 10, 20 years ago, every self-respecting wet lab wanted to have one of those. And they can easily pinpoint without having to look at the details of the different metabolites and genes and proteins. They can point, that's where that process. And they were looking at the circles. They were looking at the position. We had a cell membrane, and based on the.
I'm going to cut you short there because I do recognize the Krebs cycle as well in that whole picture. I mean, I know it. But the idea is, of course, if you have data, and I have gene expression data, I have protein expression, anything else, if I put it on there, then it's still a circle, and I recognize it, but I don't see exactly what's going on there. So how can I improve that by making it more dimensions?
So
by using the linked data.
So the multiple dimension that we did in that work is we split out. So the Wikipathways RDF is based on 2 ontologies or controlled vocabularies. And that is basically we have the Wikipathways RDF that models the ontologies, the processes, which is close to BioPax, and we have something which is the GPML representation. So we had an RDF representation of how it was structured. So that's one thing that is important to do. The other thing is Wikipathways contains has links, every node, everything. At the time we didn't have identifiers for edges. I believe that's now the case. So now you have those edges. Everything in the pathway has an identifier which we can link. So the moment you have complex data, or a lot of data, the moment you use the same identifiers, or you have mapping files, basically saying this map, which is bridge2b, which is from the same group, you can utilize that. You can actually project the data to your pathways, and then you apply, for example, color gradients, and then you can use those color coding to project your data to the to your.
Andra Waagmeester, de gelegenheid voor het verdedigen van uw proefschrift is voorbij. De promotiecommissie zal zich nu voor beraad terugtrekken. Ik verzoek u en uw gezelschap onze terugkomst en de uitslag van dit beraad in deze zaal af te wachten.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Southside, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. All your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Hit the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Andra Waagmeester, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Evelo is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Dank u, madame prorector. Belooft u dat u altijd volgens de beginselen van wetenschappelijke integriteit te werk zult gaan, eerlijk en zorgvuldig, transparant, onafhankelijk en verantwoordelijk?
Ja, dat beloof ik.
Dan, krachtens de bevoegdheid, ons door de wet toegekend, volgens het besluit van de commissie hier tegenwoordig, verklaar ik u hierbij Andra Sachinder Waagmeester tot dokter te bevorderen en u alle rechten te verlenen die daaraan volgens wet en gewoonte zijn verbonden. Ten bewijze hiervan overhandig ik u nu de bul door rector, secretaris en overige leden van de promotiecommissie ondertekend en met het grootzegel van de universiteit bevestigd. Beste Andra, dokter Waagmeester. Daar gaan we. Het is je gelukt, je hebt jezelf uiteindelijk ingehaald. En wat ik daarmee bedoel, is dat gedurende al die tijd dat ik met jou heb mogen werken, en dat is best een tijdje, Paranymfen waren nog niet eens geboren. Dat, was het altijd zo dat je altijd al bezig was met de volgende stap. En zelfs als we iets aan het afronden waren, dan was je gisteren op een symposium geweest en er was iets nieuws gepresenteerd en dat moest toch nog worden ingebracht of dat zou eigenlijk veel beter zijn dan nu. En gelukkig heb je op een gegeven moment toch pas op de plaats gemaakt en gezegd ja, in de toekomst, die antwoorden kwamen ook een paar keer op, hè. In de toekomst zou ik het toch anders doen, maar gelukkig heb je dat dan op een gegeven moment toch echt niet meer geprobeerd. En in dat verband wil ik ook Egon en Suzanne van harte belangen, want die hebben namens mij, maar ook zelfsturend, behoorlijk op de rem moeten trappen af en toe. En tegelijkertijd dan op een andere manier wel weer gas geven dat dingen ook wel eens af moesten. Maar vooral af moesten door eventjes te blijven waar je bent. Tegelijk denk ik van, het was nu een technisch verhaal, maar Andra is wel een heel sterk visionair in dingen en altijd een beetje vooruit. Niet? En ik herinner me, dat is ook lang geleden, want dat is ruim voordat die twee geboren werden, dat op het moment dat Andra trouwde, dat gepaard ging met het serveren van insecten. Nou, dat is tegenwoordig gebruikt, je koopt ze ongemerkt in de supermarkt, ja, want ze zitten verwerkt in allerlei producten en noem maar op. Maar op dat moment was dat een soort van radicaal. En er waren andere dingen die technisch speelden en die te maken hadden met, we willen optimaal gebruik maken van data. En dat zijn dan allerlei van die zijpaden die niet eens in dat proefschrift terechtgekomen zijn. Niet? Het begint al met dat tekstmining verhaal waarbij hij begon met een corpus die helemaal nooit beschikbaar was, maar ergens als bijlage bij publicaties hoorde. En ze kwam vervolgens met, eigenlijk omdat ik dat zei, meen ik, van vooral als je naar de derde wereld, zo mag je dat niet meer zeggen, landen in ontwikkeling gaat, ja, dan zie je bovenop kasten van die hele stapels posters liggen. Ja, die zijn niet alleen maar niet fair, die zijn niet eens digitaal. Niet? En toen kwam Andra met, weet je wat, als er nou eens een QR-code op die posters... Ik wist niet dat zij niet eens wat een QR-code was, zo lang geleden is dat. Niet? En van, als er nou eens een QR-code op die poster plakken, dan kan je het abstract van die poster online zetten en allerlei andere informatie. En dan opeens zijn die dingen vindbaar. En als je dan op een conferentie bent, dan scan je die QR. Scannen? Oh ja, dat kon ook. Maar had je er wel nog een aparte app voor nodig in die tijd. Ja. En wat uiteindelijk wel op de voorkant van het proefschrift terechtgekomen is Loom. Het idee dat je een pathway kunt weven, dat je dingen kunt toevoegen, maar dat was niet alleen maar een idee, dat was een tool dat daadwerkelijk werkte. We zien wel meteen, hoe zit het eigenlijk met sustainability van die dingen. Niet? Die eerste resource werd gehackt en die tweede was gewoon veel te veel werk om te handhaven en hebben we toch maar niet gedaan. Dus er zit een heleboel ervaring in. En dan aan deze universiteit zeggen we altijd van, hou ook in de gaten dat het allemaal niet alleen ergens over gaat, maar dat het ook waarde heeft. En in dat proefschrift staat een valorisatieparagraaf. En ik dacht, ik weet niet waarom die nog zo ingewikkeld geworden is eigenlijk, maar ik denk, als iemand hier weggaat en zijn eigen bedrijf begint, en met dat bedrijf dit soort ontwikkelingen ondersteunt, en dat doet zowel in de academische als in de praktische wereld, dan doen we zo ideaal als het maar gaat. En dat bedrijf intussen ook al een tijdje in de lucht houdt. Niet? Dus wat mij betreft had die hele valorisatieparagraaf in dit geval 2 regels kunnen zijn. Van ik ben op basis van deze kennis een bedrijf begonnen en het bestaat al zo lang. Nou, het is iets ingewikkelder geworden, maar dat mag. En dat sluit dan weer aan bij, ik werk met al die mensen. Ja, je probeert ook tijdens je promotie nog netjes formeel te zijn en iedereen aan te spreken met de titels, maar je kent al die mensen al lang. Nee? Dus dat merk je. En ook, je hebt het dan over Wikidata en dan heb je daar een heleboel over geleerd, maar tegelijkertijd waren er groepen in de wereld die zeggen van, ja, we willen eigenlijk onze informatie in Wikidata of in eerste instantie zelfs in Wikipedia introduceren, zoals Andrew Sue's groep in Scripps in de US. En die komen dan bij Andra uit om het feitelijk voor ze te doen. Nou, dus hij heeft in dat netwerk en de erkenning van mensen om daadwerkelijk dit soort werk te doen. En dat was dan wel een leuke cirkel, want Marco zit hier. Andra doet nu een heleboel werk voor Marco in relatie tot rare diseases, waar wij dan ook weer een hoop aan doen. En zien dat we het werk wat daar gebeurt ook weer kunnen gebruiken en noem maar op. Dus ik denk dat ze zeggen vaak van wat goed is komt snel. Maar je weet, wij doen ook een hoop werk in nutrition. En de mensen die dat spreekwoord bedacht hebben, die weten niet van goede wijn en goede kaas en dergelijke. En dat ripening ook een ding is. En dat zie ik in jou, dat zie ik vandaag, dat zie ik eigenlijk ook door de tijd. En daar wil ik het bij laten. Gefeliciteerd.
Dank je, Chris.
Dr. Waagmeester, ook namens de Universiteit Maastricht wil ik u van harte feliciteren met de behaalde dokterstitel. Uiteraard wil ik u ook uw familie, vrienden, bekenden, collega's in deze felicitaties betrekken. De supervisoren, gefeliciteerd met de afronding van deze lange periode, heb ik begrepen. Maar met een mooi resultaat. En ik hoop dat u zelf er ook tevreden over bent en ook over hoe het vandaag allemaal is verlopen. Ik wil u in ieder geval heel erg bedanken voor de levendige discussie die u met de commissieleden hebt gehad. Dat is voor iedereen leuk en het toont ook uw enthousiasme voor het onderwerp. Ik wil ook de commissieleden van harte bedanken voor hun bijdrage. Vooral de mensen van buiten, professor Vensel en dokter Roos. Bedankt dat u ondanks het sneeuwerige weer hier heeft naartoe willen komen. Ik wil toch ook nog even de rol van de paranimfen noemen. Het is heel bijzonder dat we zulke jonge paranimfen hebben en dat ze ook nog in staat zijn de Engelse stellingen op een fantastische manier voor te lezen. Dank jullie wel. Ik denk dat ik daarmee deze zitting ga afronden. Ik sluit deze academische zitting en wij zullen u volgen, nog wat foto's nemen en dan zien we elkaar bij de receptie, denk ik.